Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out about Emma Barrett Browning. Her nickname is Ba. How to manage change. In upright consciousness of place and time, do we become different people in different places? Opinionated as ever, Elizabeth sums up Sidmouth within 4 days of her arrival. The town is small and not superfluously clean, but of course the respectable houses are not a part of the town. Ours is one which the Grand Duchess Helena had, not at all grand, but extremely comfortable and cheerful, with pleasant green hills and trees behind. You may suppose that the southern climate this is when I tell you that myrtles and verbena, 3 or 4 feet high, and hydrangeas are flowers in the gardens. In August 1832, and the calamity everyone's been dreading has finally occupied. Papa has been forced to sell Hope End, and the family is to leave their idol there for good. Once it's done, though, they move will feel almost inevitable, and perhaps there is a kind of relief after months of anxiety. It turns out Elizabeth's time in the Devon town will be one of the most comfortable and cheerful of her life, as she learns to adapt and change and enjoy doing so. Over the last year at Hope End, her father has scoped out possible new addresses of Eastbourne, Brighton, and the Isle of Wight, all South Coast resorts rather than the fashionable centers that are closer to home, like Cheltenham or Bath. Perhaps he can't face meeting people he knows in the new reduced circumstances. He has certainly been increasingly reclusive since the sale became a reality. It has made Papa shrink from society of any kind lately. He would not even attend the religious societies in Ledbury, which he was so interested in supporting. In 1809, he had taken him a year to find the Herefordshire property that has to find him, and he did so alone, leaving his wife to await his children's decision. Now, as he again searches alone, it is her turn to his adult children to wait powerlessly as the lives to be refined. At last, bounce an action to be completed mansion sale, he takes Raphael House, part of the smart Regency Terrace at the west end of Sidmouth seafront. The drawing room's 4 windows all look at the sea, which is about 150 yards away, right next door to Fort Field, where local gentlemen play cricket. Perhaps this is what helps decide him. After all, he has 8 sons living at home, 3 of whom are now young adults, and every time hanging heavy on their hands. Besides, cricket is something he and the boys do together. Learnt in childhood, may even be as early as years in Jamaica. It's one of the few remaining constants of this vertiginously changing life. Indeed, on the family's very last evening at Hope End, they go out into the grounds for a game. It's painful to picture the final match among the valley's lengthening shadows. Henrietta made a sketch from the schoolroom window, which shows woods massed in the hillside, behind a game in progress on the grass, and the church spire piking the skyline like an eye catcher. But this final game is also an improvised ceremony of farewell. The late August evening must feel like the end of summer in every way. When dusk falls shortly after 7, there isn't even a moon to light the lawns. Edward Baron Moulton Barrett has become a reflective, even a brooding man, secretive and deeply religious, certainly capable of seeing this to the end of his own life summer. He's 47, no great age, and plenty young enough to play cricket and old enough to experience a midlife crisis, as even seems to crumble around him. In the last 3 days, he has lost the 2 women he depended on the most in the world. The death of his wife followed a couple of years later by that of his mother, who had for so long been effectively his only parent. On top of this, his fortune has dwindled. Papa is still a very wealthy man, but he's been forced to sell the magnum opus, which is like all builders of mansions, he must have imagined passing down through future generations. Perhaps it has even helped him picture, with an echo of the old Barrett imposter syndrome, eventually ennoblement and entry into the heart of the British establishment. He loves Hope End so much that when he dies, he'll turn out never to have relinquished the estate woodlands. In short, he sees himself as a broken down man. To rebuild everywhere, started in the skimpy seaside terrace that he rented just 1 month before, it would require tremendous willpower, never his strong point. And while it's hard for us to feel sympathy for someone who continues to profit from slavery, For the man himself, a strong religious sense of obligation ratchets up the stress of feeling responsible for supporting a large number of family and servants. The family leaves Hope End in two parties. Papa Bro and the seventh son, Septimus, or Seti, stay until the house has been completely packed up. For the main group, a philandromic departure date of 8/23/1832 has been set, perhaps a superstitious choice, set out as they pass through the streets of Ledbury and on through familiar countryside. I cannot dwell upon the pain that is the first hour of our journey, but before the first day's journey was at an end, we inexpressibly relieved from the restlessness and anxiety that have so long oppressed us, Elizabeth admitted to Julia Martin, a friend who lives at Old Caldwell, the next estate to Hope End. Grief, yes, but there is humiliation too. Julia, an Anglican vicar's daughter from the Irish Midlands, married into local gentry when Elizabeth was a susceptible 13, along with Daniel McSweeney and Hugh Stewart Boyd. She's among the noticeable number of Irish acquaintances in Elizabeth's tiny social circle, one of whose subtle indicators are the Barrett's level on the complex barometer of the English class system. But it's only now that the real friendship develops between the women, touched into life by Julia's kindness in writing straight away to Elizabeth in Sidmouth. While they were actually neighbors, the awkward age gap of 14 years combined with Elizabeth's intellectual snobbery to make the younger woman prefer the company of Mrs. Martin's glamorously well-traveled husband, James. Throughout her early 20s, Elizabeth has displayed an embarrassing tendency to admire and befriend men rather than women. Over the last 5 years, Mr. Boyd has fulfilled her need for the confident, often in the nastiest ways, but she's beginning to feel the need for female friendships, and they are in art she must learn. At home, through Bo and Sam are not back from school, the siblings' activities are increasingly segregated by gender, and her sisters Henrietta and Arabella have become her closest companions. All the same, in the first weeks after Boyd's departure, her letters to him are wildly inappropriate. Things she may formally have said face to face in private now spill into pages that will be read aloud to him, most probably by his wife or daughter, and whom she writes with presumptuous cattiness. I never could apprehend that a person with such breadth and chest and with so little tendency to become thin with a consumptive habit, this rather shaming, often transparently manipulative missives are spaced out by the relatively slow responses that they receive. Elizabeth evidently hasn't understood why Boyd's first letter after he left Worcestershire, looking back with pleasure to our past intercourse and apologizing for occasions on which he may have spoken to me crossly or peevishly, is a dear Joanna trying to draw a line under the addictive tangle of their relationship and leaving Caldwell for the environs of Bath. He has, in every sense, moving on. Now it's Elizabeth's turn to try, however clumsily, to wind him back in through. Even she apprehends dimly that there are limits and peppers her letters with apologies. Admittedly, the newsly letters Elizabeth sends to Julia Martin also tend to start with apologies of tardiness, suggesting that they ever so slightly dutiful. She also writes to Maria Comely, an unmarried young lady whom typically she got to know through her class's father, the Reverend James Comely. Very amusing, sensible, sharp-minded people, and they don't spare the pricks and marking remarks on their neighbors, and they consider it not altogether as good-natured as they might be. A third Herefordshire correspondent is Lady Margaret Cox, who, though she's the same age as Julia Martin, is unmarried and lives with her father. Elizabeth's old nemesis, Lord Somers, and Esnor Castle letters are busy with literary fireworks and family chatter. She's learning discretion, however. In mid-December, she tells Julia Martin, Mr. Boyd arrived here 3 days ago and is going to settle himself close to us. You may suppose how astonished I was to hear of their arrivals, an idea of its probability, which is disingenuous since she has been pushing for precisely this for over a month. Indeed, Boyce has broken a lease and now pays double rents as a result. Small wonder if the following May it was a touch of complacency with Elizabeth to tell Lady Margaret how she and Boyd read and talked together as in the old days, but with which time everyone seemed to be settling down to Devon life. The family has stayed in the Raphael house, the seaside holiday, with Grandmama having taught Elizabeth to enjoy the ocean, sublimest object in nature, and after this aftermath of Romanticism, society accultures young women to handle emotion by projecting it into the natural world. This isn't just a literary device that later in the century John Ruskin will label the pathetic fallacy, but social convention in the increasingly unconfessional age. As Sidmouth's tides enters Elizabeth's imagination, she'll poeticize human experience as a footstep in the sand, this morning after springtide, but endlessly watchable seaside, ozone-scented and creating its own special light, is also a playground that entices her away from her books and out for donkey rides and fishing trips. I don't know when I have been so long well as I have been lately, in spite of our fishing and boating and getting wet 3 times a day. There is good trout fishing at the Otter and then the noble River Sid. My love of water concentrates itself in the boat. However, despite its perfect location facing right into the water, the house is turning out to be too small for the numerous Barretts crowded inside it. As Zella Barrett tells Annie Boyd, we are squeezed into little rooms, 2 in a bed, something Elizabeth's amour propre has prevented her from revealing. Besides, this slice of what's known as Fortfield Terrace stands in an exposed position and is draughty. Should they stay or should they go? After a year of trying to make the house work, on September 1833, they moved 200 yards inland, a sideways shift that's the culmination of a typical period of prevarication by Papa. After all that, now, as Elizabeth will put it, the family has no ties to draw us or to bind us elsewhere. Sidmouth will do as anywhere. To Lady Margaret Cox, she gives this new home a rather romantic spin, a pretty villa or rather cottage with thatch in the veranda and a garden and the veranda's due proportion in ivy and rose trees about a quarter of a mile to the sea. The view of the sea is rather too indistinct to please me, but I am consoled by hearing it roaring and by a genuine Devonshire lane with hedgerow elms bounding our garden. Contemporary prints show that Bellevue was very much more a villa than a cottage. Unlike Fortfield Terrace, it looks like the little town and the church steeple, but the family remain cut off from Sidmouth proper. We hear that the place is extremely full and gay, but this is, of course, only an undit to us. The appointment of the drawing master, Mr. Williams, is very welcome, but hardly compensates for continued exclusion from the social world, which is almost within earshot. The girl feels that particularly opportunities to meet young men and make lives of their own are narrowing as they move into the newest home. Elizabeth is already 27, Henrietta 24, and Arabella just turned 20. A year into the stay at Bellevue, Sidmouth remains very full, and our cottage stands away from everybody almost, and so do we. Yet while our daughters' domestic lives are increasingly restricted, Pa has begun sending his sons out into the world, dispatching the 3rd and 4th boys, Stormy and George, to study at the University of Glasgow, which, unlike Oxbridge, is open to nonconformists. George will graduate in 1835 as he turns 19, and to be called into the bar in the Inner Temple in 1838, and clearly shares some of Elizabeth's precocious braininess. But Stormy, though older by 18 months, simply listens in on lectures because of a severe speech impediment, which is now starting to shape his future, his destiny of a life of family service, looking at the Barrett's Caribbean estates. Though now through it is Bro, who his eldest son is dispatched to Jamaica, charged with an heir's responsibilities, he may be, but his father lands him with the role of characteristically disempowering. Papa took him to London about a fortnight ago on supply business. EBB tells Lady Margaret Cox in November that we thought of seeing them both again in a few days, but it was otherwise willed by God, and dearest Bro sailed from the Gravesend 2 days ago. Possibly this was a paternal strategy to avoid tearful scenes and even to prevent himself from being so dissuaded by them. Papa may be aware of his own weaknesses in decision-making. Choosing this time of year for the Atlantic crossing certainly seems like a poor decision. But Bro makes it safely to Jamaica, where he finds there's plenty to do. Rumors are emancipating are in the air, but the island's assembly has been restricting British governmental pressure. Even in Almelaret, the conditions enslaved people endure there. The three assembly members voted to support of a recent proposal to end flogging and enslaved women, a trio led by Uncle Sam, who back at Cimarron Hill since 1827, the years he served as MP for Richmond, Yorkshire, empowered Sam to write in 1831 to his Whig colleagues, Lord Howick, Under Secretary for War, and the colonies of the Prime Minister's sons about the island's brutal conditions, but nothing changed. Less than 3 months after he sent the letter, the general strike held by slaves on Christmas Day erupted into riots involving up to a fifth of the island's enslaved population, which at the time totaled around 300,000. The so-called Baptist War lasted just 11 days and was brutally suppressed. Around 500 enslaved people were killed, more than half of them by quasi-judicial execution, including for trivial offenses. The assembly arguably overestimated the damage to largely its members' own property of £1.5 billion. The rioters have mostly lacked weapons, but mainly plantation trash houses where the trash leaves and stems of the sugarcane are stored and turned dried to serve as fuel for the sugar refineries. Has been set alight. The Cinnamon House is one of the few estates to escape damage. It is no coincidence. Since arriving in the island, Uncle Sam and his wife, Mary Clementa, have been recognized as more moderate than their cruel neighbors. When Mary Clementina arrived in June 1831, she was apparently much mourned, not only back in England, but by all her Negroes. The couple had brought with them the Barrett family, interested in nonconformism from England. Elizabeth's father decreed that the Baptist William Knibb should be allowed to minister to the people enslaved by his own Oxford and Cambridge estates. In 1830, when their lives had proved so chaotic that Knibb stopped the work, Papa intervened once more to enable him to continue. Such plutocracy support is key to the amelioration of the conditions it has itself created. Excuse me. In the 1830s, Baptist, Methodist, Moravian, and Wesleyan ministers are Jamaican's chief advocates of enslaved people's rights. If people not quite preaching liberation theology, they are ministering to enslaved free black and mixed heritage congregants. Enslaved people can and do become elders in these churches, to the horror of many planters. Indeed, the Baptist War got its name from the leadership of Samuel Sharp, an enslaved Baptist deacon, as well as from the spiritual and practical support that the uprising received from nonconformist ministers. During the 18 months between the insurrection and Sharp's insurrection by hanging in May 1832, nonconformist ministers were repeatedly accused of the assembly and of the courts martials, in which landowners dispense often summary justices of their own losses, of inciting rebellion and spreading false rumors that slavery had been abolished. Around the very time Uncle Sam started to give the people's unslaved in the Cimarron Hill and Cornwall estates every Saturday off, unsurprisingly, he stood being fingered by the colonial establishment. His rescue of a minister whose chapel had been burnt down by the planters prompted the custos, or warden, of Trelawney to complain. I highly disapprove of the conduct of Mr. Moulton Barrett. It has been stated to me that he was been riding out of town with a Mr. Box, who had ordered to be taken out of custody as one of the incendiary preachers. Nevertheless, Uncle Sam persisted, and when as early as 1832, Knibb was arrested in his chapel, raised, joined two ministers in writing an open letter of support, care for the local custos. This was his own first cousin, Richard Barrett, more after Sam himself had been appointed custos of St. Anne in June 1832 by a new groom governor. He supported an application of the Wesleyan John Greenwood for license to preaching, citing the Toleration Act. The courtroom in which he had been hearing the application descended into mob violence. The governor sent the troops to support Sam and to maintain order. So when Bro lands in Jamaica in December 1833, the land is, through no longer formally under martial law, in a restless state, and the Barrett name is deeply implicated in these upheavals. The following September, Elizabeth writes that her brother is still in exile in Jamaica. There is no use in dreaming it. He cannot be happy there among the white savages. I would rather see him in England, employed in the very humblest of honest employments. The telling phrase, white savages, represents a step in the slow coming in terms of the realities of slavery. Her conscience won't reach its public high point until 1848, when she's married to an abolitionist and living the new life at a distance from her family and its shibboleths amid the democratic revolutionaries of the Risorgimento Italy. To get to this stage, the daughter and the granddaughter of slave owners will have to move a long way from the position she holds back in May 1833, when she writes to the Parliament proposal to abolish slavery. The West Indians are irreparably ruined if all bill passes. Papa says that in the case of it passing, nobody in his senses would think of even attempting the culture of sugar. I am almost more sorry for poor Lord Grey, who is going to ruin us, than for the poor selves who are going to be ruined. In August 1833, however, the Slavery Abolition Act does become law, and it progresses hasten the public disgust of revelations about the Baptist War. Slavery won't be abolished in America until the 1860s, but in Britain's popular opinion, it has been mobilizing for a while. This anti-slavery society was founded by William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and the others in 1832 when Elizabeth was 17. 1831, the Barretts' last full year at Hope End saw the publication of the first British slave narrative. Mary Prince, brought to London as a domestic, had run away after 10 years from shelter with the Moravian Church and started working for Thomas Pringle, secretary of the Anti-Slavery Society. He transcribed and published her The History of Mary Prince, a West Indian slave, related by herself, an excoriating testimony that sold out 3 editions in a year. How can slaves be happy when they have to halter round their neck and whip upon their back, and are disgraced and thought no more than beasts, and are separated from their mothers and husbands and children and sisters, and are cattle, and are sold separated? Women who have had children exposed in the open field to shame. There is no modesty or decency shown by the owners of his slaves. Since I have been here, and have often wondered how English people can go out into the West Indies and act in such a beastly manner, but when they go out into the West Indies, they forget God and all the feeling of shame. They tie up slaves like hogs and moor up like the cattle, and they lick them. Despite such raw home truths of 1833 Act, it still doesn't liberate people from already enslaved. No one will actually be freed until 1838, after a 5-year transition designed to ease the financial shock to the planters. The British government also announces a fund of £20 million to compensate slavers, not the people they exploited. Even then, in 1838, does arrive the independent apprenticeships to which enslaved people are moved. Low-paid work in inescapable contracts don't constitute genuine freedom. September 1833 sees Elizabeth grumbling at the same time as virtue signaling. Of course, you know that the late bill has ruined the West Indians. That is settled. The consternation here is very great. Nevertheless, I am glad, and always shall be, that the Negroes are virtually free. That nevertheless sums up the dilemma of being born a Barrett. By now 27, Elizabeth is adult and intelligent enough to recognize that her own interests are opposed to those of the people her family enslaved. Whigs and progressive, the Barretts would be a natural abolitionist, but for their own plantations, Uncle Sam's impossible solution to this paradox replaces it with another one. Trying to be a client slave owner is a contradiction in terms, since slavery in itself, in its very nature, a crime. As Elizabeth herself will put it a dozen years from now, when she finally becomes a true abolitionist, a philanthropist, a liberal who advocates the slave trade, can scarcely be thorough. Call it a philanthropic venturing. The government's misdirected reparations compound a moral problem, ensuring that the Barrett family money returns dirty, and there's a practical problem too. The alternative to complicity is to walk away to extreme poverty. None of the Barretts displayed this level of self-sacrifice and integrity, but then in the 19th century Britain, as in the 20th century, nobody does. It's autumn 1855 when Bro finally arrives home from Jamaica In 1836, second brother Sam travels out to replace him. But now the men of the family are grappling not with the ethical fault line that runs through their fortunes, but with the huge continuing financial fallout from a more intimate threat. Before Papa has attained his majority, the property inherited from his grandfather, Edward Barrett, has been contested by his cousin, handsome son Barrett, Sam Barrett, who's claimed a historical misappropriation of holdings. This case rumbled on, finally seeming to have been settled in 1824 by order of the Council of George IV. But when handsome Sam died in Cheltenham that very month, his younger brother Richard, a trained lawyer, took over the estate as executor and trustee and dug up paperwork allowing a fresh attack on similar grounds upon Papa's inheritance. I think we shall end the story now, and we will hear about the battle between the Barretts over the estate of the slave trading going on in Jamaica. 10% of England had the same thing going on. We pray for peace for all the children, for their education, and for the teachers, and for the children of the world.